The air filled with the sizzle of superheated metal, and the smell of ozone ripped through the space as the shot found home. Fortunately for the gaggle of civilians cowering behind it, home was a half-meter thick titanium shield with layers designed to ablate in such a situation. "Target, 2 o'clock. High," a mechanical voice said. A towering mechanical suit loomed over the group, a story tall, made of metals and composites. Its pilot was relaying information to it, which he was repeating aloud for those nearby. If its squad remained, they would have heard the call-out. With its left hand, it leveled a long-barreled weapon in the direction indicated. The hair on the civilians that had it stood on end as electromagnetic systems charged, filling the air with static from a weapon that was slightly damaged. Regardless, a 100mm tungsten slug punched through the space between the figure and the building, a crack as the sound barrier was shattered. The building exploded in a shower of debris. However, what had fired on them was surely dead. Depending on the reference material, humans are a fairly unremarkable species. Their relative isolation, galactically, meant that they spent nearly 2 decades in space, colonizing nearby star systems before they made first contact. They'd made dealing with them difficult by refusing to unify. 3 separate representative bodies and 2 protectorates meant that politics had always been weird. Their ships were faster, a unique quirk of their biology allowing them to be different from others, and they'd spent so long fighting one another that they were damn good at warfare. But at the end of the day, they were unremarkable. Not the fastest, not the strongest, not even the smartest, just persistent. They'd innovated to close the gaps. Supercomputers and heavily neutered AI to keep up in thinking, and tools to match speed and strength. One such tool was the Biceps, bipedal independent combat enhancement and protection suits. They came in 4 sizes, from small to large, and connected to the operator via a neural link system. It could reach their nervous system and react as quickly as they thought about it, but with the speed and power of mechanical augmentation. King amongst these suits was the Aegis suit. It was less a suit and more a wearable tank. They'd been built to do construction jobs, able to easily lift nearly 10 tons. Someone had realized with armor plating and a gun, they made really good soldiers too. So across battlefields, before the truly heavy tanks rolled in, you could expect to see these hulking armored units marching towards you. If you were the civilians of Kantoka 6, they were guardian angels. Beset by a fierce invasion from the Horgan. An evacuation corridor has been established, but it has quickly become clear that it was more a trap to create easy kill boxes. Piloting the one-man battlesuit was Lieutenant Harris Barlow, who'd been told it would be a quick escort mission, and he'd be on his way home in a few days. That was nearly a month ago. The Horgan assault had intensified, and recently this last town had been overrun by their hunter-killer teams, massacring anyone trying to flee the city. The Horgan wanted their free labor, and were dead set to avoid losing one of the spoils of the conflict. They'd accounted for the Aegis units, having come equipped with anti-heavy weapons. Harris had been sent as the team's designated marksman, but had been forced to scavenge the thick shield from his comrade, as well as her 23mm autocannon. He was running low on ammunition for both. 2 kilometers, he said, his voice translated through the suit's speakers and coming out mechanical. Our current hunter team is down, but that only means... He was cut off as he was struck from the side by a heavy impact. An RPG had struck one of his pauldrons and threatened to knock him over. He ripped the shield from the ground and planted it in the direction of the fire. His comms crackled to life. Lieutenant, your suit is compromised, a voice said to him. A second RPG hit the shield, and a warning flashed on his HUD that the integrity of the shield was below acceptable levels. This was not the first time the warning had come up. Your reactor is damaged and your MPS is fried. MPS, Neural Processing System. It created a buffer between him and the suit, letting a small, dumb AI avoid overloading his nervous system. Extended use without it will result in him and the suit being inseparable, as his brain routed critical functions through the suit. If he broke for the evac zone, he could probably make it out without serious damage. He'd probably only need minor rehab, some surgery, and an implant to let his brain forget the suit. He'd never pilot again, but he'd be alive. He looked down, the inhuman head turning to glance at the dozen or so civilians. If he ran, they would likely die, or worse, but he would survive. They weren't even all human, a gathering of allied species on a world that wasn't even under human control. He heaved a sigh. Picking the shield up, he was careful to avoid the ground, took one step, then another, and a third, pivoting as he did, and hurled the shield in the direction of his assailants. He would need both hands. The heavy metal rectangle slammed into the small gathering of Horgan, and they scattered. Some of them probably counted their blessings, lucky to avoid being crushed. "Run," he instructed the group at his feet. Before the Horgan could regroup, he leveled the autocannon in the direction of them and pulled the trigger. Standard machine guns would be enough to down the Horgan, but the heavy rounds meant for anti-aircraft shredded them. To someone it was probably a war crime, but who was going to care at this moment? The lucky Horgan caught a 23mm directly. The unlucky ones were grazed. Harris started to walk backwards slowly, himself between the fleeing civilians, his autocannon rattling off rounds rapidly in the direction of his enemies. It gave a heave, and then a heavy clunk. It was now jammed. There was no time to unjam it. He tossed it aside, and switched to the railgun rifle. A sensor relayed his magazine count to him. He has 8 shots left total. A squeeze of the trigger, and it rang out, the loud crack of his massive round filling the space. It hit close to the remaining Horgan. Close was good enough. The ground exploded, and he pulled the trigger again, slightly off from his fire spot. There too, the earth exploded and showered the unlucky in the remains of their allies. He could feel the cold of his body, the way his joints ached. He was losing himself to the machine. He pulled the trigger again. The civilians were already out of range of the enemy fire. An RPG struck him in the chest. He fired on its location. No fire was returned to him. He fired again. Silence filled the area. He fired again. The outpost was a hornet's nest. The last remaining military members ready to pull out. Across the plains, the dozen or so civilians crossed the fence line and were shuffled off to transports. A lone Aegis approached the line. It stumbled, wobbling in its walk. A swarm of mechanics flooded towards it. It took an uneasy step before its legs gave out and it stumbled to the ground. Coolant leaked from its reactor. Its armor plates were scored and burned. Several external systems were sheared off. A mechanic pried off the cockpit, exposing the pilot within. Lieutenant Harris Barlow raised a hand. His Aegis raised its too, threatening to send his saviors flying. Someone said something to him, but he couldn't hear. Someone had ripped off his microphones. Blood dropped from his mouth, and he gasped. He couldn't breathe. Everything was wrong. He couldn't see. And as the man lay there, collapsing to the ground, he watched the last shuttle of civilians depart. He could feel it, hear the comm traffic, but not. A medica said something he couldn't understand. They never were able to separate man from machine. He'd live out his days in a stripped version of a similar hull. He pushed himself too far, gave up his body and his ability to truly be with his family. But he hadn't run. He had made sure those people got off planet safely, hopefully to their families. And though machines kept him alive, he could say, at least in his soul, he was still human.